Uncle Jim saw him. He had been playing cards all night at one of the clubs and was walking home. He says he met Mr. Howell face to face and spoke to him. The woman was tall and veiled. Uncle Jim sent for him a day or two later, and he refused to explain. Then they forbade him the house. Mama objected to him anyhow, and he only came on sufferance. He is a college man of good family, but without any money at all save what he earns. And now I had had some young newspaper men with me, and I knew what they got. They were nice boys, but they made $15 a week. I'm afraid I smiled a little as I looked around the room, with its gray grass-cloth walls, its toilet table spread with ivory and gold, and the maid in attendance in her black dress and white apron, collar and cuffs. Even the little nightgown Liddy was wearing would have taken a week's salary or more. She saw my smile. It was to be his chance, she said. If he made good, he was to have something better. My Uncle Jim owns the paper, and he promised me to help him, but so Jim was running a newspaper. That was a curious career for Jim to choose. Jim, who was twice expelled from school, and who could never write a letter without a dictionary beside him. I had a pang when I heard his name again, after all the years, for I had written to Jim from Oklahoma, after Mr. Pittman died, asking for money to bury him, and had never even had a reply. And you haven't seen him since? Once. I didn't hear from him, and I called him up. We met in the park. He said everything was all right, but he couldn't tell me just then. The next day, he resigned from the paper and went away. Mrs. Pittman, it's driving me crazy, for they've found the body, and they think it is hers. If it is, and he was with her. Don't be a foolish girl, I protested. If he was with Jennie Brice, she is still living. And if he was not with Jennie Brice, if it was not Jennie Brice, then I have the right to know who it was, she declared. He was not like himself when I met him. He said such queer things. He talked about an onyx clock and said he had been made a fool of, and that no matter what came out, I was always to remember that he had done what he did for the best, and that he cared for me more than for anything in this world or the next. That wasn't so foolish. I couldn't help it. I leaned over and drew her nightgown up over her bare white shoulder. You won't help anything or anybody by taking cold, my dear, I said. Call your maid and have her put a dressing gown around you. I left soon after. There was little I could do, but I comforted her as best I could and said good night. My heart was heavy as I went down the stairs. For, twist things as I might, it was clear that in some way the Howell boy was mixed up in the Brice case. Poor little troubled Lida. Poor distracted boy. I had a curious experience downstairs. I had reached the foot of the staircase and was turning to go back and along the hall to the side entrance when I came face to face with Isaac, the old colored man who had driven the family carriage when I was a child, and whom I had seen at intervals since I came back, pottering around Alma's house. The old man was bent and feeble. He came slowly down the hall with a bunch of keys in his hand. I had seen him do the same thing many times. He stopped when he saw me, and I shrank back from the light, but he had seen me. "Miss Bess," he said. "For God's sake, Miss Bess!" "You are making a mistake, my friend," I said, quivering. "I am not Miss Bess." He came close to me and stared into my face, and from that he looked at my cloth gloves, at my coat, and he shook his white head. "I sure thought you was Miss Bess," he said, and made no further effort to detain me. He led the way back to the door where the machine waited, his head shaking with the palsy of age, muttering as he went. He opened the door with his best manner and stood aside. "Good night, ma'am," he quavered. I had tears in my eyes. I tried to keep them back. "Good night," I said. "Good night, Ikkie." It had slipped out. my baby name for old Isaac. "Miss Bess!" he cried. "Oh, praise God, it's Miss Bess again!" He caught my arm and pulled me back into the hall, and there he held me, crying over me, muttering praises for my return, begging me to come back, recalling little tender things out of the past that almost killed me to hear again. But I had made my bed and must lie in it. I forced him to swear silence about my visit. I made him promise not to reveal my identity to Lida, and I told him, heaven forgive me, that I was well and prosperous and happy. Dear old Isaac! I would not let him come to see me, but the next day there came a basket with 6 bottles of wine and an old daguerreotype of my mother that had been his treasure, nor was that basket the last. End of chapter 8.